Now that vaccines are becoming available in the US, the next question is, what kind of long-term impact will COVID-19 have on people? And what kind of companies are in the process of studying that and may have treatments for that? So with me is Andrea Porcellia, the CEO of Swiss Growth Forum, and also Lisa Conti, the CEO of Napo Pharmaceuticals, to talk a little bit more about this as we continue to learn and study this disease. So Andrea, tell me a little bit about what you are seeing and the companies that you're dealing with in this space.
Well, I think there's a lot of excitement, particularly in Europe, because they're a little bit farther ahead of the curve, having had, sort of major breakouts even before we had them in the US. So they've really shifted their focus now to those companies that can treat both acute symptoms of COVID, such as respiratory distress, which is what we always hear about when people are, seeking ventilators. There are ways to treat people so that they don't end up on a ventilator. In fact, there are some companies like Relief Therapeutics, which is up about 38,000% this year. This is a repurposed drug that is seeking emergency designation in order to treat acute respiratory distress. So the company is now worth about $1 billion, and they're in phase 2 trials, I believe, on the actual drug. And then the other focus is dealing with COVID long haulers. There's a great deal of recognition that anywhere between 30 and up to 80% of people who have had COVID, even the ones who are asymptomatic, are having long-term symptoms.
Well, perfect intro for Lisa then. So Lisa, come and explain to me what Napo is doing. And I know you've got a unique business plan with sustainable sourcing for pharmaceuticals. So tell me about that, and then also what you're doing with the long-term effects of COVID.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So the product is Mytesi. This is a product that's already approved by the FDA. It is, as you mentioned, it's plant-based, it's organic, it's sustainably harvested, it's fair trade. And it is an FDA-approved product for an indication now of HIV-related diarrhea. In HIV patients, you have about 50% of the patients who are dealing with enteropathy, which is a long-term survivor inflammation throughout their body that is observable for the inflammation in the gut in terms of diarrhea and gastrointestinal distress. That's what we find analogous to what's happening with the long hauler syndrome that is emerging in COVID-infected patients. Whole body inflammation and an overreaction of the immune response. And what's observable in the gut early on is this gastrointestinal distress, this diarrhea. Napo EU is going to focus on the development of Mytesi crofelemer, which is the active agent that comes from the rainforest for this particular syndrome. And Europe, as Andrea was mentioning, seems well poised to move quickly.
So Lisa, we just had news that there was a new coronavirus strain in the UK. They have locked down that country. There's talk about maybe it's 70% more contagious than the COVID that we're currently dealing with. I mean, is there any way crofelemer might be able to deal with this, or how its exposure in Europe or application in Europe might be beneficial?
Thanks, Jane. The urgency with which we now have to deal with this long hauler syndrome, because there's going to be so many more people infected before we can get the effective vaccine deployed to the full population that needs it. So it was interesting. Just last week in the US, there was a meeting of healthcare professionals and patients talking about all the symptoms associated with the long hauler. And there was a declaration that perhaps this is something that should be considered a syndrome. But while there's a debate in the US whether this should be defined as a syndrome, which probably has as much to do with insurance reimbursement as it does with health and treating the patients, in the meantime, you've got hundreds of clinics throughout Europe that are being, with a lot of patient advocacy, trying to deal with these long hauler symptoms. So the urgency with which we need to get into a development program, and both prophylactically as well as symptomatic management of, or as well as treatment of the symptoms. And that's something that we have experience with. We have a phase 3 clinical trial going on in the US right now in diarrhea in cancer patients with cancer therapy that is both prophylaxis and treatment. So the urgency with which we need to deal with this, particularly a GI symptom, because the whole inflammation situation is being defined and trying to find a solution for it. If you're having GI distress, you are not addressing your own wellness, your own strength, the absorption of your vitamins, your calories, your nutrients. So we are even more on it. The virus has urgency, we have urgency.
Mm-hmm. So what's next then? I mean, you've already started the application process in Europe, but this is kind of is there an emergency use authorization that you could seek there, like what we have here with the FDA?
Let me correct that. We haven't started the application process in Europe yet. So what we're doing is putting together the package from all the U.S. experience that we have. Because remember, we have a chronic indication approved. We have a product we have a full supply chain in place. All that information is being pulled together to meet with the European regulatory authorities to talk about how can we get this to patients in need with urgency? What sort of an accelerated clinical development program can we have using the words of the EMA? How much real world experience can we bring to play to get this into the system, get this into patients as quickly as possible?
Okay. And then, I mean, it seems like we're just having trouble kind of controlling this. And I mean, is that like, I guess that even adds to the urgency in terms of the post-COVID treatment and what we're going to learn about the long-term impact of this disease.
So we're learning to control this situation, both the viral infection and the inflammation. Nobody really knows exactly what's causing this. There was just a patient who was on the US News Network last week. The first thing she said, 9 months of diarrhea, it's a living nightmare. And so if you just can't give people basic comfort and basic wellness, how are they going to get through the symptomatic relief to get to understanding and treating the underlying inflammation, if that's in fact what it is?